Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We're recording, hopefully in continually good quality in this cross-continental podcast. At the moment, my compadre's in El Salvador, I believe. The place used to be quite murderous, but isn't so murderous anymore, thankfully. And yes, if the connection isn't too great, we apologize for that on this episode 11, and we're constantly doing work to make sure we give you our voices in the best quality possible. Today's topic is one that I find quite perplexing. It's pretty straightforward, but that's why, I'm perplexed by it, because there seems to be a lot of fuss about it. And that's, the whole, for lack of a better word, gender agenda. I'd like to speak about that, and specifically certain factions of that movement. There's a certain part of that acronym, particularly the T's, but
and to be very cautious, audience, with our terminology, not because we're individuals willing to submit to the state and their agenda, but naturally, if we say certain things too many times, there won't be any podcasts left on YouTube for the likes of us all to listen to. So we may alternate, we may utilize certain terms to refrain from using the kind of the flagged words, for lack of a better term. Is that right, James?
The flag, the multicolored flag,
Right.
Absolutely. Hello, can you hear me?
I can indeed, yeah.
Okay, good stuff. I suppose it kind of, a good place to start is, well, what actually is hate speech, and what actually is and isn't allowed to be said, and what are the reasons for said things not to be said? Do you know what you're actually allowed to say and not allowed to say in...
I do. I don't have a filter, so I generally say, without contradicting my earlier point there about this, I do say whatever I want, though in this case, we still say exactly what we mean. We're just going to change certain words around. But obviously, there's no such thing as hate speech, because, we can go down a deeper valley than perhaps what the topic should be about. But everything is subjective, is it not? I think we've had this debate multiple times, and it goes into the origin, the source of all the kind of the ultra philosophy of self-interest. But without going down that spiral, you like chocolate, I might not like chocolate. Someone likes an Americano, some people don't. Some people like orange juice, some people like pineapple juice, some people like black, some people like brown, some people like men, some people like women. That's the kind of reality. So the idea that there's this kind of like moderator at the top of the chain telling us what we can and can't think is exactly what was depicted in the Orwellian novel, 1984. What was it called? Think. Oh God, I always forget the term.
Was it Thought Police?
Something like that. Not quite, but I'm sure our audience know. But essentially, it's like a Minority Report scenario. That beautiful film which came out with Irish actor, his name I forgot, and Tom Cruise, about thought police.
Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell, yeah. And how you're essentially being arrested and criminalized before you even open your mouth now. And that's actually a thing. Without saying what they determine to be hate speech, sometimes they can invoke protocols to have you arrested or imprisoned based on what you may have said in the past and what you might be intent on saying, with of course no evidence to substantiate it. And the idea is, you're pushing people into a scenario where they're fearful at every level, just like that video you showed me earlier with bikers a biker having his motor robbed in the middle of London streets by some kind of hooligans, gang members, criminals, whatever you want to call them, and no one does anything. Because on every level, people are scared. People are scared to act, and now people are going to be scared to think. And that's the aim, to get people in their spaces.
Yep, and and that's deliberate, of course. It's like there's repercussions for acting. For speaking truth, there are repercussions. For speaking even opinion, yeah, we could say an opinion is less than the truth. For saying what may even be wrong, there are repercussions. And when I say wrong, I mean in terms it might be factually incorrect. It's not that like it's morally wrong to be factually incorrect, because through being wrong, one learns, right? It's like nobody's born with all the knowledge in the world. So if I say something that may be deemed hateful, that may be incorrect, should I be punished for that? I'd say no. I'd say that people should be given a chance to, learn and think freely in order to learn. Yeah, in order to learn. Um, Obviously, I can see arguments, against that. And once again, kind of going at like a philosophical wormhole, but essentially, when freedom of speech is restricted, in my opinion, there'll be more negatives than positives. Another thing that those who have listened to us from episode 1 know that we obviously go into numbers quite a lot, and the Crown Prosecution Service's Hate Crime Act. It's the Crime and Disorder Act, and it came into effect in 1998. Which you have 999 or 666 if you turn that upside down. The 1 and the 8 making a 9, and the 99 in the middle, so you've got 3 nines there. And it comes under Section 66 of the Sentencing Act 2020. I shit you not.
And for our audience members, this obviously is a kind of never-ending scenario where if you look even at numbers like child line, I believe we had that discussion before, of the line that's protect children, it of course contains the satanic, the numbers that one would expect, just like in this kind of, in this case, and it's really everywhere. And again, it's about mockery. It's about, telling those that are involved within the higher echelons, the fraternities, sororities, secret societies, what's going to happen and what to expect from the next decade or whatever. It's a code essentially for those that understand the code.
Absolutely. So so now we go on to the comfortable but uncomfortable topic of these people who say they are what I believe them not to be, which essentially they aren't. And then how these people should be referred to as, and how we should accept what I would call a delusion and reality, i.e., the majority of people who aren't like that have to succumb, I don't know, facilitate
the agenda of the minority under the auspice somehow progressive and somehow selfless, and therefore what's the word that we always use when we have the discussion with respect to self-interest, whether not like non-self-interested acts are actually possible? It begins with A. Do you know the word I'm thinking of?
Altruism.
Exactly. So this idea that actually what we're doing in society is something that the state would call altruistic, that it's nice to care for your fellow man, which of course is the truth, but they've spun it in a way where we have to uphold those with less, or those that represent a society to a lesser degree, above all else other. And of course they throw into the equation, as they naturally do, truths within this. So they throw into the equation examples that may well be justified and respected, looking after, for example, people that have disabilities, and especially extreme disabilities, someone that doesn't have legs, and therefore out of our money, out of our taxes, we sustain their existence because that's the morally correct thing to do. But of course this has now been pushed across as far as one can imagine to the notion of questioning whether there is anything other than male or female, and they've decided that that is case. And now we have to uphold ideas and concepts which can't be substantiated, once again under the auspice of respect, and therefore progression. But of course, this progression, respect that they branded as, is simply a way by which to control society further and further, as we stated earlier, with the restrictions on how people now are unable to act in terms in cases when they ordinarily would, throw a criminal off a bike. Now they're too scared to do so, because actually the criminal has the upper hand when it comes to the proceedings, and the person that was the vigilante may have repercussions for actually helping another fellow human being out. And that's what we're seeing with respect to the rainbow group, the idea that somehow not only should your genitals command respect if you put them in places that are perhaps not representative of the larger extent of society, but then from a political perspective, everything they say from there on is branded as better, more important, the priority.
Which makes no sense on a biological, and I don't like this term. It's somewhat loaded, but I wouldn't say evolutionary, but just in terms of progression and survival. Yeah, in regards to survival, their genealogy is somewhat of a dead end if we're talking about, in regards to organic matter. Of course, you have like in vitro fertility, and and things like this, and even like test tube babies and things like this actually exist. But in regards to real human interaction, organic human interaction, they would essentially come to a dead end. So in regards to what's good for humanity, what makes sense in regards to us thriving, in terms of what we can objectively see naturally, is the way, the status quo, even that term, it wouldn't be correct, just the innate natural inclination of the vast majority of beings isn't to be that way. Yet there is an agenda to teach this quirk, or this position, or this choice, however one wants to view it, and for this to be taught and normalized to our children, so they can grow up to be accepting of said people that are part of the rainbow group. It's
Absolutely right. And on that, sorry to interrupt. On that, the idea is, of course, to make it acceptable to, as we stated earlier, to push to the forefront all that is not representative. So when you do take things that would seemingly have a valid agenda, say 30, 40 years ago, when people that were attracted to the same sex didn't have the same rights, which is now certainly not the case in the Western world, where this is being from, it would have the basis of morality and justification. That means that they can apply things to that scenario, to this agenda, which aren't representative and which don't have substance and standing. And it is, like you said, to train the next generation, to take people's children away from them mentally, to create that divide between family, which is an important term, and things that are now loaded as negatives, like tradition, a term that years ago people would have, wanted to prosper and thrive at promoting, the idea of, celebrating kind of historical pasts, not in all respects, but in respects to the kind of like the social network of human beings. But now it's quite contrary to that, and now they can throw into the agenda tomorrow becoming thing, which I think, James, we can acknowledge is a truth without making a tangent and without interrupting you even further. But what they are now starting to call in the US MAPS, which is minor attracted persons. So people don't know what that term is. These people are child abusers and pedophiles. And they're trying to normalize this scenario now. And it's come from the very same thing that we are now discussing, i.e. this respect for everybody, irrespective of whether it's morally correct. Not to say that what we're discussing isn't necessarily morally correct, but they are able now to throw into the equation things that clearly aren't, under the guise of protecting every human being and how every human being's life has equal value, which is certainly not the case, especially when it concerns people who are abusing others. So return to what you said, James. I apologize. Every time I interject, it seems to turn into a tangent.
No, absolutely. It was a valid point and one that needed to be heard. And you know, I think, I mean, I believe to an extent. I mean, on paper they say that, like, you know, free speech still exists, right? But I suppose it kind of doesn't if there's repercussions for saying certain things, like being, you know, deplatformed for essentially telling the truth. But I think it's safe to at least touch on, like, the philosophical side of this argument, and in terms of how do we define, you know, these people that are of said position, i.e., you know, Tom that thinks he's Tabitha, for example. Is that a genetic quirk? Would one call that a psychological disorder? Is it a condition? Is it something that, you know, one can grow out of? Or is it a blend of the two? Um, I have, you know, pretty, clear opinions on what people, you know, can and can't be in regards to gender and in regards to their, you know, sexuality. I'm just interested in what your thoughts are on that, and if you're brave enough to give your opinion without getting us
I
deplatformed.
absolutely am brave enough, 100%. It seems like I'm always having an argument or a debate, and I thrive off it. I like it, and I think we all should promote it more because, of course, you know, debating and sometimes disagreeing is the way to kind of
Whittle things
stabilize
down. Yeah,
to you know to aid mental progression, to, you know, to find
absolutely.
is the perhaps truth. There is a thing I heard called gender dysphoria. Now, this is a term, again, that they've concocted. So just because something is termed, it's coined, and it's supplanted within text, which gives it kind of validity, because, well, you know, something, as soon as something's in print, it goes down in history, and that's always synonymous. But I remember a famous quote said by either Napoleon or Victor Hugo. I never remember which one. I think it's Napoleon. It's the victor that decides the truth. So those in power, of course, create our so-called truths. Now, the idea of gender dysphoria makes logical sense on the basis that there are Siamese twins. There are people that are born with all kinds of quirks. And believable, you know, if you take hermaphrodites, I think we discussed them before.
Yep.
Lady Gaga is or isn't, that's an individual in the public eye that it has been rumored that she shares both genitals. Now, these people are anomalies. They're absolute anomalies. And my opinion stands that it's possible that somebody is born with more inkling towards male, but physically might be a female. However, that's certainly not relative to the numbers that we see now, both in public, physically with our own eyes, and within the media, how it's portrayed to be a large representation or a larger representation of the global populace. Now, if someone that did have gender dysphoria, and out of those people with gender dysphoria, which I believe are a tiny, tiny minority, most aren't surely going to be enough of the other sex, whether mentally or physically, to want to take surgery to their own body and slice and dice what they have known. Remember, this person should be an adult before they're able to make a decision, which is their decision to make, to change their body, just like someone can have tattoos planted all over them. And just, you know, someone can potentially slice off their ear like Van Gogh if they so wish, though that person would be deemed, you know, mentally unstable. And that itself is where I guess the topic may end up. But I guess if someone it has been proven beyond all doubt, and this is again difficult because this comes from medical examiners who work for standardized medical bodies who promote pharmaceutical companies and the political agenda that govern both pharmaceutical companies and all of us, which is satanic at heart. We know that to be the case, whether it's through the numerology or the other aspects that we can see, at least for those that have eyes to see. If out of those people with gender dysphoria, there were a few people that felt the need to pursue some kind of surgery, and then the numbers, the statistics showed it was just the tiniest minorities, then it wouldn't bother anyone. And frankly, if this was a large majority, why would it be marketed? Why would it be advertised? Why would we be reading about it? Millions of people die every day from starvation. There are wars that govern pretty much every continent 24 hours of the day. Somewhere in some corner, something violent is happening, something that has more value to someone that's concerned with that kind of media coverage. Media is obviously not just promoting this because it's something that affects us all, because it doesn't. So what is the reason for this promotion, James? And why is it being taught in schools? And why are children now being allowed to have these surgical implants which change their aesthetic and their well-being potentially permanently? Now, this has come out of nowhere, hasn't it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's something that we've touched on before, and I mean, if you want to destabilize society, as you know, as we know, there is an agenda to do that on many different levels. The fabric of society is family, as we know, and the family unit, especially the nuclear family, gives you the strongest foundation to build strong people. And we know this because the vast majority of people that are in prison usually lack father figures, etc. Like we know this is across many continents. Studies have been done, and coming from an unstable family background now, this is not to say that two males or two females can't bring up a stable child. There's definitely cases of that being done. We're just saying in general, what we do know is the nuclear family, with a responsible male and female at the helm of that, raising children, breeds, yeah, progression and progressive individuals, absolutely. And as I alluded to before, in regards to, there seems to definitely be somewhat of disorder linked with people that have particular tastes, let's just say, in regards to who they want to be involved with, romantically. There are, the best way to put it is that what is the norm is what the majority of people do, right? And what's natural philosophically tends to be, the right way. Everything's been kind of designed with progression in nature, and in humanity you can see how intervention, like human intervention, can change the course of nature. We have the ability to do this. So introducing a new norm, or normalizing something that is in fact a quirk, we can see a clear correlation between societies that embrace this quirk and birth rates. I mean, and we could see almost the opposite in places that don't. So, for
with
example,
one exception, which you've noticed, which is interesting in itself,
mm,
Japan. Silence has happened. Are we
yep,
still connected?
yep, I can
Just
hear
sorry
you. Japan, yeah,
for Japan. They have the lowest declining birth rate on the planet, I believe, and yet I don't think they would ever sponsor these behaviors that we do see in virtually all other places where there is a declining birth rate. So what would naturally be called, I guess, the West. That be fair?
yeah, 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 definitely, especially places like Italy, the UK, some parts of the United States, lots of
Scandinavia.
Northern Europe, Canada, yeah, yeah.
Canada's perhaps the worst of the bunch at the moment. I'm surprised it surpassed the United States, but then we all know why, don't we? And actually, interestingly, I wouldn't say it's down to perhaps a breakup of the family value set with respect to Canada, though there may be reasons for that. I think it really comes down to the liberal agenda as a whole and how the birth rates have been declining in the West as a consequence of the consumerist, materialist, capitalist monetary drives, and we reach the peak of the financial system that we pursue. And after that, they've begun to introduce the rest of the things that may cause the final cataclysm. Because these things didn't exist, the things we're discussing now, say 40, 50 years ago,
No,
even less, most
no,
places. By
yeah,
that point, West already had the declining population. Therefore, the origin of these thought processes comes from the the need not to put effort and the need not to work, comfort for lack of a better term. Just like if we're to believe the historical narratives that talk about Rome and Greece and the fall of Constantinople, they teach it as if it, which may well be the case, and which I'm sponsoring here, whether or not these examples are true, kind of a lackadaisical nature, laziness overcomes those that don't need to pursue further effort to exist because everything is on a plate. You can get your fast food. You don't have to prepare food. If you don't have to prepare food, you don't have to go to the market where you're going to integrate and socialize and buy all the different ingredients to then go home and buy the stove. That's just one example, but it's a process of lots of things which require effort to gain an outcome. Whereas in this consumerist Western society that we now find ourselves in, because of the lack of demand for that, the link is broken, the chain of events is
mm,
broken. People's ability to act when acts should happen have regressed and disappeared. And that's a very kind of artsy-fartsy, I guess, kind of grayish way of explaining it. But I do feel that that is why the birth rate decline happens anywhere. It's lack of the lack of need to defend. No longer is there a need to defend one's family and stand up and compete because competition has been eradicated. The West monopolized the rest of the world. And I'm not saying specifically this happens just with the West, because we've seen the rise and fall of all empires, of course. But what we're seeing now is that it's a lack of competition. Lack of competition leads to lack of social cohesion, which is necessary when competing with oppositionary factors. And it's that lack of social cohesion which leads to lack of communication. Lack of communication leads to the lack of act, for lack of a better expression. There's no need to defend. And before I go into a rant, James, you're back on.
no, yeah, absolutely. I I mean, you've just expanded upon my answer to your question, which is essentially it's attack on the moral fabric of society, the inner workings. Like it's just it's the building blocks for all of these things: socialization, food, thought, family. All of these things. Even in terms of freedom of movement. And to be quite frank, it's about embracing differences. I mean, this is going to sound like, and it's ridiculous that I'm gonna that I have to think about saying something that is so clearly true and obvious, and that's that males and females serve purposes and serve different purposes. Let's just look at absolutely, anything in the animal kingdom. Oh, and then people say, oh, yeah, but we're not, we're not animals. You got to produce that. But I mean, the bottom line is that, females can do things that men can't do, and men can do things that females can't do, even after having all of the surgery. Um, one being, I don't know, I would never be able to breastfeed, I can't, breastfeed a child, and a woman can't inseminate an egg. These are just, there are fluids that we produce that women don't, and there's fluids that women produce that men don't. And that serves a purpose. Nature has a reason for that. Science. I'm not even going to call it nature. Science is real life, and science is how things interact with each other. Science is the molecular and biological structure of everything around us. And science dictates that we, have men and women, and men and women play a purpose. So if one is saying that as human beings, we should interfere with nature, and bear in mind that, there's this whole thing about climate change, that we've interfered too much, and we need to start creating things that don't interfere with nature as much because it causes global warming. Then surely, and the reason why we don't want global warming is because it's going to kill people, right? It's going to get rid of, it can affect us, it can change our lives, it can make things more inconvenient for us. It's just quite ironic that something is being pushed that definitely isn't, helping society, if we're talking about in terms of life and birth rates, for one. And if somebody wants to, call that a reach, we can go even further. And out of all the groups, and we're talking about even men, and we know that men have a well-known suicide rate higher than women. What's even higher than men are people that are post-op, um, yeah, post-op Ts, um, opties, yeah, and they have a high suicide rate. So it's clearly not particularly good for the groups who are receiving, said, medical stroke cosmetic treatment. Um, so yeah, on so many levels, this agenda is bizarre. So it's an attack on the wider public. It's not helpful to those receiving the treatment. At the same time, we're normalizing very extreme behavior of people with a quirk. And yeah, it's unfortunate, or maybe it's fortunate. I mean, if people enjoy having that quirk, good on them. I mean, if I was born with, just to say, 6 fingers, I might think my 6 fingers bloody cool. Like, okay, cool, and there's nothing wrong with that. um but for me to then, go into school, or, just tell the world to say that my 6th finger is completely normal when I'm one of 0.01% of people in the world with, this quirk, it just seems a little bit bizarre. And I'm not saying it's 0.01% of the population um, that are in the group of people that want to, transition, but we just know that it's the vast minority of people, right? That's just a statistical fact. That's an official statistical fact. If you want to go you know, if you're into, you know, normie stats, and if you're just into, you know, stats in general, and anecdotally, you can, from life experience, we know that this is the vast minority of people. Even if you go into areas with the highest percentage of those people patronizing the area, you'll find that it's still the minority of people in those areas. We're talking about your Sohos and, you know, your places like that. It's still going to be a minority of the people. So it just seems, yeah, you know, rather bizarre that it's been kind of pushed on like a widespread level when, you know, there are already laws, like you said, for a long time to, you know, protect such people. Everything is equal already. So it's just a matter of kind of almost like pushing their agenda. Um, One more thing I'd like to mention on this is that apparently we're not just men and women anymore, John. Like, as a straight man, I'm now a cis man, apparently. I'm not just a straight man. That's the new label is that I'm a cis man, and I find it quite ironic that cis has almost no positive or masculine connotation. Cis is like sister, sissy, cyst.
Exactly.
There is, yeah, and
And there's abnormality to it by applying a term, that an abbreviation, if you will. It denotes the idea that the majority of males are now, in fact, a minority, because usually you have subcategories of things which are never representative of that category as a whole. You know, man is primarily a heterosexual individual, statistically speaking. Right?
exactly.
So when you abbreviate and you create this well, what would seem like a subcategory, and you call the majority overwhelmingly cis males, it brings to the table the idea that actually they're no longer valid. They're no longer the overwhelming. They are, in fact, of a secondary standing, which is of purpose. Hence, you know, the examples you gave about how the word itself sounds. Cis, for me, is the most prominent thing that comes to mind when you hear that term spoken. Cis, which is also negative.
Exactly. Cis man. And then once again, you have this thing called a pansexual, right? So, from my understanding, you have I don't see how you can get anything more than this. You have at most five classifications, and one of them is just, or two of them are absolutely, you know, just absolutely sick. So you have people that are straight, you have people that are gay or homosexual, and you have people that are bisexual, right? That makes perfect sense to me. And then on the peripheries of absolute perversion, you have people that are attracted to children, but once again, they fall into either being gay, straight, or bisexual because the children are either males or females, right? And in some very, very, very rare cases, a child may be a hermaphrodite. And then you have people that like animals as well, which comes into a term that begins with the letter B. So essentially, you know, you've got maybe, you know, four different types: homosexual, straight, bisexual, and that group that do that thing. So you have this thing called pansexual, and I read the definition for it, and I struggle to understand what the difference between a pansexual and a bisexual is. So I'm wondering why there is even a term called pansexual when it is a bisexual. And if anybody can answer that question,
Please leave a comment.
Yeah.
Or maybe leave a comment. Probably get flagged. You can email. The email is in the description below.
There you go. because yeah, a pansexual is somebody who's just attracted to anybody, it's just their personality. So it could be anybody, or yeah. So okay, if you can be attracted to anybody, then as far as I'm concerned, you're bisexual, right? Am I missing
So
something here?
I've got 2 points to make. One with respect to what we've literally just spoken about. But beforehand, you spoke about things that men are only able to do and women are only able to do.
Yeah.
And that's what differentiates between, what is a man and what is a woman, right? But you gave an example, and one of the examples was men can't breastfeed. Absolutely.
Correct.
However, there are now individuals that are regarded by the state, and therefore, by default, the society is expected to acknowledge this as a fact. There are now women or men that have transformed themselves under their belief system into what they feel is a woman, and there has been an artificial system implanted within their breast, which now apparently enables the so-called female, as the individual would like to be addressed as a fully, a fully formed female that has the capacity to now breastfeed. Now, for me, the aim of the game is to create the idea that man or humans are above nature, and nature is synonymous with the creator. Now, not coming at it from a religious standpoint, but the creator, as far as I'm concerned, this is only my opinion naturally, but I believe it's simply a metaphor for nature as a whole, a way of explaining, if you like, to people, the value that, there is an ultimate creator, and that is nature. And everything that's evil and satanic, and everything that goes against things that we've discussed here, so people that are actively trying to destroy families and the idea of birthing and raising children, which has been the normality since the dawn of time, as far as we're aware, are those individuals that sponsor the idea that science, which is a term loaded and created to oppose nature under the auspice that what is a derivative of man's knowledge is superior, which is ironic given that man comes from nature, is superior to nature itself. And that is because, like I said, the whole system the whole system embroidered within the term satanic or Satan worshipping or evil or bad, it's a system that has this abhorrent need to crush normality for its own gain, because it is the evil that will always, fortunately, I hope, be the minority in the world. And as a minority of bad, good has to be overwhelmed with their ideas for them to survive. Just like the monetary system, just like every other aspect that we see of, of badness in the world, it's purported by a tiny group of individuals that have to create division and war and bloodshed for us to subvert the equilibrium which is necessary for us to exist. Equilibrium is balance. It is in the middle ground. And there is no middle ground in politics anymore, as we've seen. You are either blue or red, left or right. You can't be what the term liberal denotes as something that stands in the middle and accepts all. What is now liberal, in fact, is an extremist
left,
which is the right, because it's a horseshoe. It's the same ideas. And order through chaos is, of course, a term known within the secret society as of Freemasonry, as the kind of the brand, the logo, the kind of the symbol of their desire, and it purports, to create absolute destruction and chaos, order through chaos, order for them, of course, existence for them, stability for them, power for them. That's the order, and chaos for us. Their order is gained through destroying equilibrium and balance. And it is my opinion that the promotion of certain things that would seem to be a very low priority, if that term can even be applied, in the grand scheme of things, when there are people starving all over the world and wars are happening, the idea that we have to see and hear about a very small group of individuals' desire to change how they look and supplant ideas of womanhood in a man's body and manhood in a woman's is clearly a form of creating further animosity between neighbors. And I think I feel that is the prime motivation for many of these things which we see.
Absolutely. I think a quote to kind of round this up. It's not new. It's been heard before. It's been said a million times, but it's just so applicable to this scenario. And if you can't accept who you are, the chance of somebody else accepting you are slim. And if you're, somebody who, okay, cool, yeah, you might not look the way you want to look. And I respect, the way somebody feels. There might be like a woman who might not be happy with how her chest looks, so she wants to get, implants, for example, or someone might not like their nose and might want to get like a rhinoplasty or something, like that. And if you don't accept that about yourself, then you change it. You're not giving anybody a chance to accept you for the way you are. And if you go to an even greater extreme, to the point where you're essentially trying to change your whole classification, your whole sexual class, by going under a knife and essentially mutilating God's creation, nature's creation, for lack of a better term. It's going to be hard for people to accept, because most people wouldn't think about doing that to themselves. There are millions of people in the world who are unhappy with at least an aspect of how they look. I'm not completely happy about absolutely everything, but I'm grateful that I'm alive, and and I kind of give thanks for it. So one could argue that there's an element of narcissism and neuroticism wanting to change, yourself to to that extent, because essentially it's an aesthetic change to please a state of mind. So it's
An example would be, if you're
yeah.
confident and happy with who you are, why do you feel the need to push it on others? And there's a term we have in the not sure if it's shared in other parts of the world, but new money and old money. And it's a term that was, as far as I'm aware, usually applied by perhaps the elites of the old money world to those that they didn't accept within their group. However, there is also validity to it, because you'll notice that when the footballer makes 100 million, they go out and they buy the flashiest, most, what I would see as an unsophisticated, certainly not a modest vehicle. It would be a stripy bright green or zebra striped Lamborghini, and they have 10 or 15 of them in a fashion not at all modest. But if you took old money, like a classic aristocrat up in Northumberland, they may be driving the same Rolls Royce that was supplanted into the family garage in the 1960s or 70s. They wear obviously a nice set of clothing, but it's not going to be flash. It's certainly not going to be lined with like Mobutu and Tsar, one man who flashes to mind having spent, I believe, more money than any other dictator in the world in the Parisian designer outlets. Things like puma fur or seal skin or something that's so outlandish, something so ridiculous, because it's all about the show. And the reason these individuals would would have to show off, whether it's the footballer, the new money investor that got lucky in a kind of tech startup, something like this. The reason they have to show off is because they're certainly not comfortable with who they are. The fact that everybody else has to see at all times, as far as they're concerned, their so-called success is because they don't see what they have as success. For them, it's not about the achievement. The achievement for them through this expression is other people's acknowledgement, because they're not confident with who they are. They require the acknowledgement of others, or the perceived acknowledgement of others, for them to feel like they exist. And I feel like this can be compared to, I guess, the topic at hand to a degree.
Absolutely. There's a general aesthetic with these kinds of people as well. Case in point, go to a skate park. There's generally a way that skater dudes dress. Not all of them, but there's just a general way that, and I suppose one could say that we're going, down the road of stereotyping, for example. So, but there are things that, I suppose there is such a thing as a data, for example. So if we went back to, if we said that, certain types of people do a certain type of job, well, generally speaking, in certain eras and in certain places, that's true. Was it aristocratic children in the Victorian days that were chimney sweeps? Absolutely not. Maybe 1% at best, right? We know that.
I think maybe a little bit more than 1%. My understanding was children were chimney sweeps because they were small enough to be dropped down the chimney. That's why. I think quite a lot. not to contradict your.
Let's. I'll tell you what. Let's do a live bit of research, and let's.
Assuming we believe what comes up on Google.
Chimney sweeps demographic. That's what I'm gonna Google. See.
Chimney sweeps. I'm sure children were chimney sweeps because they were able to fit through the chimneys. That was the entire purpose. They could go up and get at the areas that were kind of burnt down. There was an excess of soot.
So 92% of them were white. No, sorry, 92% of them were male. 60% were white.
60%. Surprises me.
Yes, 60%. But that kind of makes sense because
England? Really?
Exactly.
But I guess at that period, this wasn't measured anyway. So this data set probably comes from the fires of the 60s and 70s, I imagine, in which case I do believe it, because generally speaking, Labour would be more cheaply achieved from minority groups. But I guess if we're looking at Victorian England, they wouldn't have measured there'd be no data set for, the gender ratio or the sex ratio between male and female chimney sweeps and kids.
Right, okay. This is actually United States stats. All right, so we want to find UK. Okay.
And how many chimney sweeps were children in Victorian England? Google search.
Right, okay.
For our viewers.
Literally on the UK Parliament site for it. The child labour, 19th century.
It's even depicted in Oliver Twist.
Minimum age of 8 years. Right, okay. So from the age of 1788, the minimum age was 8 years old. I mean, how fitting. 1788, 8 years old. I mean,
yeah.
In the 1830s, they raised that to 14. Okay. No actual stats on the numbers there. Okay. Right. Okay. So the majority of them, were orphans and abandoned children.
They were children, the majority.
Yeah. Orphans and abandoned children. So they weren't from they probably weren't from. Yeah, I mean, it's possible that aristocrats abandoned their children, but let's just say it was, like a small percentage. A small percentage.
Okay. So what was your point? Use another analogy, I guess, or another example. We've lost our train of thought. We're now on chimney sweeps. We can do an entire episode on chimney sweeps. I think that'd be quite.
Yeah. To be fair,
isn't it?
I'm sure Gibson's probably touched on that. Probably.
Yeah. Our audience, check out this channel.
But yeah, I think
I say
my point.
Channel. Sorry, Michelle Gibson.
Yeah, Michelle Gibson. I think my point with the chimney sweeps was about things that. Oh yeah, it was about stereotypes, right? And it was about stereotypes and like, putting certain people in a group. And I was saying that generally people that undertake said operation generally have a said aesthetic, just like generally people from certain, backgrounds might not be doing certain jobs, for example,
It's like one quick
like,
example.
like for instance, like royalty don't become professional footballers a lot of the time, for example. You might have like one or few examples of like a Saudi prince having like a son that became a professional footballer, but generally speaking,
a really good point there. Why do people that are perhaps more affluent and from aristocratic lineages not become professional footballers? Because I'm sure along the way there's been a few that could, not just through influence, but in terms of ability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there actually have been.
But I feel that's one of the fundamental reasons for our discussion on this topic of transhumanism, for lack of a better term. When people are comfortable with their lives, there are many things that we could all do, all the comfortable people in the world, which actually goes back to the original point of birth rate. We're comfortable, so we don't want to. If you're comfortable with who you are, irrespective of if you genuinely have something like gender dysphoria, if you're in an environment where you're catered for and cared for and you have, emotional connections, it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that someone would feel the need to pursue the surgery, even if they did have valid medical grounds which sponsor the idea that they are in a transitional state, either physically or mentally. Just as the footballer that was a royal and might have 20 million in the bank, or the could have been footballers, or the royal that were 20 million in the bank that perhaps had the ability to be a footballer, they opted not to because their life was too comfortable already. They already had things that gave them a sense of enjoyment. There was perhaps even success and achievement that they didn't feel the need to. So is that not the crux of it all? Just as you said, these stereotypes and how people look a certain way. Well, when one's comfortable with themselves, take an example of the stereotypical hippie. If someone's truly a hippie, surely it's something on the inside, something that's emotional, a way you act and feel and integrate with the environment around you. So why do you always have to wear ponchos and smoke weed? Well, perhaps
exactly. There's a look. It's almost like there's an aesthetic that they go for, and there tends to be an aesthetic that, drag and cross dressers and people tend to go for. It's a general aesthetic. It's objectively visible. Yeah.
Tribalism is a form of self-interest. I knew it was going to get to this, James, because we want to band together with those that share the same interest as ourselves for social survival, and social survival is a derivative of individual survival, i.e. banding together for the better of the group, the tribe, and therefore the concept, the notion of spraying one's hair pink and having 20 piercings in the ears, which may be a stereotype, and getting a skateboard and listening to Slipknot and having that hoodie, is because you seek acceptance from others with similar interests for your own individualistic, self-interested nature.
Agreed. It is that. There is like, the idea comes from somewhere. It's not like these people don't all innately, and yeah, it's absolutely possible that, chili and garlic taste really nice together. So the fact that lots of people like chili and garlic together is like, yeah, okay, cool. Yep, I get that. But however, I'm not gonna, eat chili and garlic so I can be, for example, I eat chili and garlic when I'm, by myself, for example. So I'm not gonna necessarily, eat chili and garlic because I want to, be around people, other people that, also eat chili and garlic, because that can be across a whole demographic. But in regards to people that have these very niche, small percentage interests, it makes sense to, wear that badge. It's like, those people that have like a certain color handkerchief hanging out of a certain pocket to denote what they're into potentially sexually, for example. There are people that do these sorts of things, or people that, wear like a collar around their neck. These are very niche. This doesn't what John said doesn't equate to all behavior that's similar. You need to be able to read between the lines and look at smaller groups of people. When people are doing specific things that are more specific, that's when it's down to tribalism and wanting to identify with others with that share similar interests for a self-interested purpose.
The brand, isn't it? It's marketing yourself for your own social progression and thus social survival and thus self-interest. The pink hair or the Slipknot hoodie, it's all a brand. I mean, you go to a Slipknot concert, okay, you might feel it's nice to express your loyalty to the band by wearing a Slipknot hoodie, but then it's the same thing, isn't it? You don't have to wear the Slipknot hoodie to watch a Slipknot concert. By the laws of logic, you're probably there because you enjoy the music. It's an extra accolade. It's an extra tick box in your mind so that the social periphery can acknowledge in your mind that you're somehow the better fan because you've shown up to the Slipknot concert with something extra that other people, and then someone shows up with a Slipknot hat, so they're even better. That's two ticks. It's all about getting one over on your neighbor. Social competition, and I completely agree with your point. And actually, the chili thing, I would say, completely valid. But you are an anomaly. I would like to say we are all not perhaps us all meaning our audience, not representative of the general individual. I mean, these podcasts, these kinds of topics are certainly not things that most people would engage in. And I would say that with the food thing, for most people, it's not the case that they actually go and eat certain things because they like it. Because if that was the case, McDonald's wouldn't exist, Burger King wouldn't exist, every fast food outlet out there wouldn't exist because the food's crap and has no taste. But they're still in business today and they're doing better than ever because people want to be acknowledged. It's about a brand. They go there so people can see they've been to McDonald's. They can walk with a McDonald's coffee in their hand, and in their mind, people are seeing that, and therefore they're getting some kind of social gratification off of the idea that social kind of prowess over the rest. It's like a star or, on an exam. It's like a brownie points in the teacher's classroom. That's how these people look at it, and that is why consumerism is so kind of nauseous, and it's a part of every aspect of our society. People have Umbro trainers, Umbro pants and an Umbro top. Again, it's the same as a Slipknot scenario. It's about gaining as many brownie points within your social periphery as possible.
Literally makes me sick, as you say. Yeah, literally. Yeah, nothing makes me sicker than that kind of premeditated, shallow thinking, for lack of a better term. Yeah, there was another point that I was gonna make, but I lost it. But
Apologies.
I mean, eugenics, social engineering, transhumanism, all of those terms can be attributed to this strange agenda that that we're seeing kind of like take storm, and this push to normalize the abnormal. I mean, in a literal sense, in terms of pushing this minority representation upon people. And to anybody who's of the demographic, we're not against you. Yeah, there's just certain aspects that we would want rationalized, and we're just kind of giving our understanding and viewpoints, and you're welcome to share yours in the comment section.
There we go. End of episode 11 or extra. I'm going to give it a little.
Remember the point. So, we said that we were gonna add in a little Berlin story now and again, right? So, just to show how aesthetic. It's funny. So, a few of you might have heard of a club called Berghain.
James, can I say really quickly, really super quickly? I want you to tell this entire story, and one of the larger parts of the reason is that I can't tell this story in public in a coffee shop. So you're going to have to tell the story in its entirety, every detail.
Okay. So what I was going to do was, I was going to tell them the kind of prelude to the story, and then literally, I think the full story is a pod in itself.
That is true. But we could do the story after this or tomorrow, actually.
Yeah. Absolutely, we can. So the prelude is that there's a club called Berghain, and the fact that we tried to get in this club, and we weren't allowed in because we were normal, straight-looking dudes. I mean, I can't think of any other reason, right? I mean,
and we did have our tops off, and no one else did.
Did we?
Yeah, we did. Remember that we met those two grungy guys that had obviously just been rejected as well. And as we were walking around the corner, they said to us, guys, what will be great is if you take your tops off, you've got a better chance of getting in. So we rocked up. It's freezing cold, middle of winter. Everyone else is dressed atypically. And we tried to, I guess, use kind of a different psychology in that. Well, because we're looking different, surely we would get in or might have a greater chance because everyone else is just dressed in black, which is actually what you're supposed to do because you have to adhere to the protocols of the club, even though at the same time they brand themselves as being alternative, they're anything but. And so we rocked up without our tops on, and I think that's probably the real reason we got.
Either way, we were straight dudes. We were straight looking dudes. I just thought, you two, get out the queue. Everybody else in black, wearing makeup, fucking dog collars on, wearing leather, wearing trench coats. I think even the way we just stand, even the way we stood, our haircuts were just, normal guy haircuts. And I think when I get to, so it's ironic that
it is ironic.
This group is one of the most discriminatory groups. The same thing happened to me recently. There was a nightclub in London that I went to with two of my friends. And I'm going to describe all of us to you aesthetically. And I don't know, and just let me know what you think. So, German guy with, light brown, golden hair and a nose ring. Wearing, I don't know, like a jacket, normal jacket, jeans, a pair of boots, probably Doc Martens. Me wearing a black puffer jacket, a woolly hat, jeans, and a pair of Timberland boots. And they were black, if that even matters. And another friend that was wearing, he was wearing like some kind of like knitted jumper, some combat trousers, short, stocky, bald guy, Arab, so German guy, Arab guy, black guy. Anyway, so there's this lady who very well could have been a man once upon a time, who knows, but was at the door. And this place is frequented by people of various sexualities, I suppose. They were like, oh yeah, well, we just want everyone to be respectful of the clientele. So it was quite strange that instantly you've seen people who you assume are straight, because maybe none of us are, and then instantly assume that because people are straight that they might have a problem or be discriminatory against people inside who are not, which is an interesting position to take. Anyway, we're all like, okay, yeah, that's right, okay, cool. Anyway, we proceeded in the queue, and bear in mind that the three of us, German guy, hoop in his nose, he's got kind of like long, kind of like surfer dude hair, curtains on the side, bald Arab guy, kind of stocky, tall black guy, yeah, athletically built, let's just say, athletic to medium build. And the security guy comes to the queue and he goes, yeah, sorry, you and you can't come in. This selector person said that, yeah, you two can't come in, but he's all right. The German guy, being the German guy with the ring in his nose, was all right to go in, which I found interesting, and purely because he fits an aesthetic. I don't think it had anything to do with race primarily. I just think that might have been exacerbating factors, like in terms of, there's sometimes a perception that, these countries don't have as much homosexuality, even though that's not the truth. In Nigeria, there's like gay bars. In Afghanistan, there's like an
Oh,
absolute
yeah.
epidemic of, I don't know, just like sexual abuse against men. By the men, it's ridiculous. But I
It's
think the
exactly
main thing is that we didn't have a ring in our nose. We didn't have a ring in our nose and long hair. Basically, I think that's what I'll put it down to primarily. And we wasn't wearing leather. We didn't have dog collars around our necks, and weren't wearing makeup and all that sort of stuff. So we weren't allowed in.
I want to say
And can
one.
you imagine if it was
Go
a
ahead, go.
straight bar and we didn't let them in because they
Yeah,
were a bloke
it would
wearing
be.
a skirt? Like literally,
Well,
literally get arrested. Like literally get
yeah.
arrested.
But what
Literally.
I was gonna say, this is exactly how tribalism works, and this is just how these groups survive and thrive. Take a certain country in the Middle East that begins with I. Now, this
Mm.
country, some might say, brands itself and is so successful as at being known because of a way of marketing past narratives, past events.
Yes.
Thrive off of branding and marketing yourself, right? And the best form of that is the negative, which is why the media use negative energy over time. It's a dopamine fix. It gets people's attention more readily than if you talk about panda bears and koalas getting bred up in China. A war is always more potent and prominent than the negative always is. So, things like that are branded by the state as hate speech. People latch onto that and literally, like a mosquito, draw up the energy from within and utilize that for their own gain. And if you let everyone in,
Exactly.
if you were nice to everyone and everyone just got along in society, the tribe would no longer be distinct. It would no longer be a tribe. It would merge in to the rest of the kind of social periphery, and there wouldn't be that distinction. And that's just the same way that the state organize themselves and separate the rest of us so that they can remain prominent at the top of the pyramid. It's one and the same scenario, just a micro version of the macro.
There we have it, guys, in a nutshell. I have nothing else to add.
Oh, maybe you should tell the next part of as a prelude of the Berghain up to the door of the next place. And
Right.
we get
Okay.
it, we'll create a new episode just so we don't lie to our audience and provide
Yeah.
you guys with something that's a little bit of a teaser, hopefully,
Okay.
because I tell you the story is worth hearing at our next episode,
Yeah.
which we do today.
So this is like, I feel like it's coming. It's our last night, isn't it?
I think so.
I think it's my last night in Berlin. It's one of our last nights in Berlin, or is it both of our last nights? Either way.
We've been rejected from Bergheim, and now we're
Fine.
walking in the cold, and we're working out what is the next step.
Move. Yeah. And And John's like, there's this place called Kit Kat. And I'm like, what? Kit Kat? I'm just like, in my head, like, the name just sounds like bizarre, like Kit Kat. Okay, what's that? He was like, oh, yeah. It's good. Yeah, it's legendary. And I'm thinking, oh, like, okay, it's like a club. Like, I have no idea. Yeah. But it's just like, we're going to go to this club called Kit Kat. So I don't know, I think we might have walked to the train station, probably got a beer from somewhere, and then we're on the train with our beer. Maybe we jump out of the train, jump in an Uber. Yeah, we jumped in an Uber and then we got out at the Uber. And we're outside this club. And I'm thinking to myself, is this actually a club? Because all I can see is like a big gate. I can hear no music. I can see no lights. I can see no partying.
There was no one
But
at the door.
yeah, and then, it was like, oh, it's definitely here. So we walked up to this, gate that looked like something from like a Saw movie, like, I don't know, it was like some derelict entrance, like a warehouse kind of thing. This like tall, like, iron sheeted gate. And there was like, maybe like a little buzzer thing. And we kind of rang the buzzer and gave it like a few knocks. And then slowly the gate opened and a burly Eastern European bouncer figure answered, and he was like, yes, yeah, well, what do you guys want? And we said that we'd like to come in. He looks up and down, and that's where I'm going to end the story.
And I'll continue on with a good camp impression of said individual for the opening into the underworld on our next special episode, because this story does require, and we might throw in a few more stories. I think it does require its own episode, so it's not going to be a conventional.
Absolutely, like, yeah, it was epic. It was yeah.
Absolutely great insight into what happens, in the underworld. And I guess we'll leave it there. And I hope all our listeners, our 4 or 5 of you, enjoyed today's talk. And yeah, you can find us on all the alternative channels, or if you're listening on YouTube, here for a while until we inevitably get cast out into the abyss by the Google monsters. And yeah, and again, if you want any questions answered, or you want to throw us some recommendations or emails or whatever, the address is in the description below. So yeah, and a comment and a like is always appreciated. So yeah, anything else to add to that, James?
No, absolutely not. Once again, we just like thank you all for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you guys again on episode 12. That's going to be a different one.
Enjoy the day. Have a play. We'll touch base soon.
Bye. Ciao.